Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. In the first story, we tell you why you need to know your worth and fight for it. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. When you know a job isn't worth it. So I've worked in the restaurant industry for years now, working my way up from IHOP to Olive Garden. I loved Olive Garden. I was getting $20 a table in tips. But, well, the world ended, so I decided it was time to keep climbing. So I began to look for manager jobs, starting in fast food and catering, and figuring I'd work my way up from there. I got offers instantly, and all of them caved into my pay demands. I said I wouldn't work for less than $20 an hour. Where I live, that's barely enough to cover my bills, never mind spending money. One final bit of background before I tell you about this awful offer. The same morning, I talked to a catering company and resort space that told me the pay was $15 an hour. When I explained I can't possibly go that low, they said they'd call me back. An hour later, the offer was $18 plus tips and whatever food was left over from events. I eagerly accepted as their menu looks amazing. But as it's just weekends, I was still looking for a job to fill in the gaps. 1 hour or so later, Boston Market called. Now, I had applied to them with hesitation because the location they needed a manager in was a pretty bad city, but I figured it was worth a shot if they were going to at least pay well. I'm fairly flexible and willing to give places a fair chance. Well, this guy came on the phone demanding to know why I think I'm worth anywhere close to $20 an hour since I had no previous management experience. I pointed out that I have a master's degree, years of experience, and actually enjoy the restaurant industry, which is why I was accepting such jobs instead of a corporate cubicle somewhere. I figure given my experience and the fact that I can make a fortune in tips at other places, maybe he'd get the idea that I actually know my worth to the industry. Nope. He said that I was greedy and I should be grateful to be offered $15 an hour as a starting manager. I then informed me McDonald's within walking distance of me offered $17 an hour. He didn't believe me. I thanked him for his time and hung up. I'd almost hung up when he called me greedy, but I was trying to give him a fair chance, figuring maybe he'd never been haggled with for pay before. I spent the next week or so wondering how companies can beat people down so much that even their managers don't realize how much they should be demanding as reasonable pay. Listen, people, if you want to be paid your worth, then stand your ground and demand it, nicely. Don't settle for places like this where they clearly have no interest in ensuring you can or will get what's reasonable. Just keep looking. And our next story. My cousin stole loads of jewelry, so I stole his inheritance. 25 years ago, my aunt passed away when I was a baby, leaving my two cousins who were both in their early 20s alone to fend for themselves. My grandparents, who were wealthy, put a clause in their will that grandkids will receive half of their share of inheritance if the parent passes before the children reach age 30, then the other half when my grandparents eventually passed. Both my cousins received a very sizable inheritance, coupled with the money they got from selling my aunt's house. The younger of the two paid off her college loans and was able to buy property. She still lives on the same plot of land. The older sibling blew all of his money, straight out of a book of the Bible, within 6 years. He was back to living in a condo, working as a police officer. Everyone in our small family knew he had a substance issue, so he was barely making ends meet with his officer salary and drinking a lot. The next 4 years, my cousin went to rehab 3 times, sponsored by my grandparents. He sobered up after getting his girlfriend, now wife, pregnant. Absolutely wretched woman. She saw my grandparents as payday and essentially baby-trapped my cousin, thinking it was her ticket. Within 7 years, they had 3 kids, so she's locked in tight. She's a nurse, and with 3 kids around, they always need a little boost. Guess who they'd always ask? You got it, my grandparents. Being the kind spirits they are, they always lended a hand. My father, mother, sister, and I got sick of it pretty quickly. My grandmother, unfortunately, passed away when I was 17, leaving my grandpa as the last remaining. I was undoubtedly my grandfather's favorite among the grandkids, which left a real sore spot in the mouth of my cousin and his wife. I had 2 more years at home before college, so I lived with my grandpa to keep him company and help take care of him. My cousin and his wife hated this so much so that whenever they came to visit and I wasn't home, they'd send their 3 gremlins into my room to destroy it. My room had double doors, so it couldn't be locked. This was the start. The longer I lived there, the more they would mess with me. My cousin even went as far as to place one of those little mechanical noisemakers in the cabinet in my room, the ones that play sounds at random intervals that make you think you're insane. Thankfully, my German Shepherd would always hear it, and after a week or so, she finally found it. They did this to distance me and deter me from taking care of Grandpa so they could swoop in and be the heroes. This continued until one of the kids found my gun. By this time, I was 18 and in the possession of a firearm. I use quotations because my grandfather has guns, but can't aim and shoot them anymore due to his arthritis and nerve degeneration. So when I moved in, he placed all the weapons in my hands should the need of self-defense arise. But should he see them out for any reason other than cleaning, there would be hell to raise. Being very well trained with guns and having a sense of pride in defending my home, I took this responsibility very seriously. I always kept a handgun in a locked container in my nightstand with the key on a high shelf out of reach of the gremlins. One fateful day, I'm getting my grandfather food when I come home and my older cousin, his wife, and my grandfather are staring at a gun on the table. It was my gun that I kept in the lockbox. It was loaded and had a bullet chambered. I always keep a magazine in the lockbox but never loaded into the gun. The lockbox was nowhere to be seen. My cousin claimed one of the children found the gun and was playing with it. I was 100% certain that he either found the key or broke the lockbox open to get to it and load it, as a 6-year-old would not be able to reach a key I could barely grab, figure out what it was to, load my gun and chamber it. I tried my best to explain what my cousin had said was bullcrap and that I never keep my firearms loaded in the house, but my cousin, who's a cop, scolded me on gun safety and threatened to have me arrested if I didn't leave and hadn't arrested me yet because we're family. I was asked to collect my belongings and go back to my parents. My cousin had won, or so he thought. The next day, I apologized to Grandpa and explained to him there was no way one of the kids could have gotten the key. He agreed with me and he apologized, but thought it best I moved out until things cooled down. But once they do, I'd be welcome back home. Our relationship was a little fractured due to disinformation provided by my cousin. A month later, my grandfather died of a heart attack at 86. I was devastated. I was just beginning to get back into rhythm with him and rebuilding the trust that was somewhat shattered. To this day, I'm still unsure of what kind of man he saw me as due to my cousin. Immediately, my cousin and his wife began sucking up to my dad as they had sealed payday with Grandpa. It was time to move on to the uncle. This persisted for a month or two. I wouldn't stand for it. Then it came time for the will. My grandfather's lawyer read out the will to me, my father, mother, and sister in our home. Our 2 cousins would be briefed individually on their share of the estate, per my grandparents' requests. Then the miracle line in the will comes to fruition. If anyone attempts to claim any part of the estate that's not assigned to them, they forfeit any assets they're supposed to receive and will be divided equally among the remaining family members. This was basically their way of saying, if you try to claim more than you're given, you get nothing. My father's supposed to receive every piece of physical property, aside from 2 or 3 items he set aside for me from my grandparents, as he's the only remaining child. The revenge. I hatched my plan. I called my cousin and told him all of Grandma's jewelry was to be donated to a charity auction. Grandma's collection of gems and medals was extensive to say the least, so a charity event wouldn't care if a few pieces didn't make it, right? It was a lure of gargantuan proportions that my greedy bee-turd of a cousin could not resist. He bit right on it and headed over to my grandparents' house ASAP, determined to snatch up as much as he could. A handful would send his kids to college. Regardless of what I said, the jewelry was never going to go with him anyways, so his actions were purely his own, since none of it was destined to be his. Coincidentally, Dad was on his way with a lawyer to my grandparents' house to overlook everything, formality stuff. According to my dad's testimony, my cousin had 3 shoeboxes worth of Grandma and Grandpa's jewelry piled on the kitchen counter, ready for loading into his car. My dad and the lawyer stood in the kitchen wondering why it was all there when my cousin walks in from my grandparents' bedroom with a 4th and final shoebox. The jig was up, and he put 2 and 2 together that I set him up, which was true, but there was no penalty against me for exploiting my cousin's greed so he'd F himself over. It's worth noting that between the 18 years from my aunt's death and my grandpa's death, their wealth had increased several times over, so my cousin felt cheated and expected to receive just as much as my sister and I, despite receiving half of his already and blowing it. Throughout this whole ordeal, the younger sister, my other cousin, has not had a problem at all and is still weeping over Grandpa's death like the rest of us. However, just like that, my cousin lost enough money in the course of 30 minutes that made him contemplate his sanity over greed. My cousin's bee of a wife apparently filed for divorce a few weeks later. We haven't heard from him in nearly 6 years, as he's all but disgraced now. You can call this a fairy tale ending, and on this particular part of the story, it somewhat is. There was a massive lawsuit by an unknown family member involving the IRS and FBI later on, but honestly, I'd rather have my grandparents. It breaks my heart to see family members destroy their relationship with their loved ones over greed. I appreciated what you said, but more than anything, you wish your grandparents were still there. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.